So we're going to start with Brian Spector and Mike Scott from CertiVox. They're going to talk about splitting root keys. CertiVox is working to rid the world of passwords and replace them with M-PIN. So, did I get that right? No. Awesome. They'll tell you why I didn't get it right. That's the important thing. Take it away, guys.
Okay, so am I on? Are we live? Okay, good. So the title of this talk is called Splitting Root Keys, or How We Learn to Quit Worrying About Government Requests for Data Decryption Keys. Very exciting. And the genesis for this talk was actually an experience that happened to our company about a year and a half ago. And to give you some background, the company that Mike and I are from, we're co-founders of a company called CertiVox. So CertiVox is actually born of Irish roots. Mike is the same Dr. Michael Scott, who is the head of Dublin City University Computer Science School for many, many years, and one of the most well-known, renowned cryptographers in the world. Don't get embarrassed by me introducing you like that, but we're lucky to have Mike on board as a co-founder. And what we do is we develop encryption and authentication solutions. So we just completed a Series B fundraise. We're not in the market for any more funding right now, but I'll certainly talk to any VCs out in the audience. We just completed that fundraise with NTT on the back of a platform that we've introduced called M-PIN. So it's M-PIN, but the pronunciation is M-PIN. So M-PIN has a simple function. It actually is a complete drop-in replacement for all online systems and platforms that are still using password authentication. It gets rid of password-based authentication entirely. So all the things that you hear about eBay losing 200 million passwords, and LinkedIn and Yahoo and Evernote, that's the problem that we solve, effectively with a web-based solution that gives you two-factor authentication and removes the password vulnerability from your back-end systems by getting rid of all your passwords out of your back-end. So along the way to building that, we first built a service called Private Sky, which was an encrypted messaging and file transfer service platform, which actually had all the same technology wrapped up into this service. Now, we launched this platform before Edward Snowden blew up in the news cycle. And what I can tell you is that the one thing that did change between Private Sky and M-PIN was the title of this talk track, Splitting Root Keys. So the unfortunate thing about today is that I went through a big, elaborate presentation and a lot of work setting up this presentation. And on the advice of some folks in the company, we actually submitted it to our counsel for review, who immediately redacted 90% of my presentation. What I can tell you is if you go up and you do a Wikipedia search on CertiVox, it says that we took down the Private Sky service as a result of requests for decryption keys from government authorities who were compelling us to turn over those decryption keys so that they could unwrap our customers' data. And the reason that they were actually requesting that of us and that they could do that is because we were actually holding this singular root key. And that is a bad place to be if you're offering any kind of security service on the internet. Root keys essentially power things like how you go and buy shopping online, and you have a secure SSL session, and you're able to make sure that the data you're sending from your browser up to the server is encrypted. That's all powered by a root key system. And unfortunately, there's a huge vulnerability in that root key system because the holder of a root key, say VeriSign or Global Trust or Google, can be compelled to turn over any decryption key they want that's a derivative of that root key. So without actually going into my presentation, if you were a authentication and encryption company that had just gone through this horrible experience of actually shutting down your service, and then of course the Edward Snowden cycle broke, so we shut it down about 3 months too early, shutting down your service because you were getting requests for data decryption keys from government authorities that you had to comply with, what would you do to actually offset that in a future product or service? Well, probably what you would do is do something like we've just done here. And to double click on that a little bit further without getting me into any further trouble, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Michael Scott, our co-founder and chief cryptographer at CertiVox and the head of our Dublin research department called CertiVox Labs. So Mike, take it away.
Brian, am I on?
You're on.
How do I move forward to the next slide? Okay, you can control that. Cucumber, okay, well, we'll come to the cucumber in a minute. First of all, yes, as Brian has introduced me, I'm Mike Scott. I was a career academic in DCU for a long time, and the only thing I want to say about that is that DCU degrees are as good as, or if not better than, Trinity degrees, just in case Paddy Cosgrove's out there somewhere. Right, okay. The problem we're trying to solve is one of replacing username and password, right? Because we know that that's a complete disaster, right? And you may wonder why the community, the academic community, has been kind of slow to come up with the solution to it. Because it turns out that the solution requires a new kind of cryptography. As it happens, this kind of cryptography was my research area until when I was working at DCU, until about a couple of years ago when I left to join this startup, CertiVox, which is very interested in exploiting some of these new ideas. Okay, so to get to the heart of the matter, if you want to authenticate yourself on the internet, one good way of doing it would be to have some kind of cryptographic key. Right now, the kind of cryptography we're going to use is a spin-off of elliptic curve cryptography. It's called pairing-based cryptography, and it's very, very mathematical, very complicated. It's beautiful stuff, but not really appropriate for a 10, 15-minute slot like this, right? Hence the cucumber, right? So you're going to see a rather forced analogy, right? So hopefully you'll bear with me, but hopefully it helps me to make the points. A cucumber can be regarded, this cucumber is a cryptographic key, right? This has been given to me, and it's going to allow me access to some service on the internet, right? Now, this is not just a big number. It is a cryptographic key with some structure to it. In fact, my identity is embedded into that, right? This has been given to me by some authority, and I'll come back to that issue in a minute. It's been given to me by some authority. My identity is embedded in it, and it has a structure in it which means that I can prove I possess this very particular, unique to me cucumber using what's called a zero-knowledge proof. Now, a zero-knowledge proof means that I can prove I possess this without actually revealing it, right? Which is a very clever, slightly counterintuitive idea, but cryptographers are always coming up with clever, counterintuitive ideas. Right? So I can prove I possess this without actually showing it, right? I can prove that I have it, right? Okay, that's all fine and dandy, but that's rather a large key to be carrying around. It's not going to fit nicely on my key ring or fit into my pocket, right? It's big. In fact, it's 512 bits, which isn't as big as the equivalent RSA key, which would be 4,000 bits. So it's small, but it's not small enough for me to remember and to carry around. So the idea is, how I'm going to deal with this key is I'm going to chop a bit off it. I don't know how I got this past security, by the way, so you guys need to check on that. But, right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this secret that's been given me, and I'm going to divide it into two parts, right? This part is the bigger part. This part is it's like a PIN number. This goes into my head and I remember it. This goes onto my mobile phone or some USB stick or whatever, and I carry this around, right? Now, the analogy to an ATM card is exact. This is my ATM card. This is my PIN number, right? Add them together, do the business, right? Take them apart. Okay. Somebody robs my mobile phone. They get this part, right? Now, having that part, actually, having that part or capturing that part does not reveal this part, right? In other words, there's no amount of mathematics you can do in this which will tell you what the missing part is, right? It could be that bit, it could be that bit, right? It could be that bit, right? But you've no way of knowing except to try and access the service, just like with an ATM card and PIN number, right? You're left simply having to guess the PIN, right? Now, You might think this is kind of obvious, right? And you're right, it is kind of obvious, but with standard cryptographic secrets, you can't actually do this, right? And that's the magic of the kind of cryptography that we do, right? So, okay, you're not happy with a PIN number, you want a biometric. Okay, let's chop another bit off. This is derived from my face. Whenever I look at my camera, the camera and some software derives a number from that. That number then is that part of the key and then that part of the key. Now you've got three-factor authentication. So you've heard of multi-factor authentication. What could be more obvious than a cucumber? Chop it up as many bits as you like. 2-factor, 3-factor, 4-factor, 5-factor, 6-factor. No problem at all, right? But these keys, to be able to do this safely, that's the special bit. That's the clever bit. And believe it or not, standard methods of cryptography up until now haven't been able to do that. Right? So that's what you do. Right? And okay, I was looking around on the internet for something that wasn't a cucumber, right? And I found this vaguely familiar looking shape. Right? Now, would a key like this work? This might be regarded as kind of classic cryptography and trying to do the same thing with classic cryptography. Well, the problem with classic cryptography is if you chip a bit out of it, it's obvious what's missing. You can easily figure out from the larger part what the missing part is. It's a trivial calculation. So this is like, if you try and do it using this older technology, it's like having an ATM card with a PIN number written on it. Right? In other words, you haven't got 2-factor authentication, you've basically only got one, and you get no extra security from taking the bit out of it, right? That's the clever bit. Right, now, let's just rewind back to the beginning again briefly. This secret was given to me by some authority to allow me to access some services on the internet. Now, your question might be, who is this authority, right? And who the hell are they, and why the hell should we trust them? Right? And that would be a very valid point to make, right? So, but look, it's a cucumber. Means I can slice it, right? So here's one solution to the problem. This part of the secret I get from one authority, this part I get from another. This is what we call distributed trust, right? In security systems, trust has to really reside somewhere, but the safest way to handle it is to distribute it. Right, this part comes from some authority based in Germany with very strong privacy laws. This comes from some part based in the States, right? And if you're not happy with that, well, let's chop it up again and get another part from somewhere else, right? These parts are all calculated completely independently by these completely independent authorities. I then, when I receive them, I stick them together as before, and I chop the end off to create my PIN number, or I chop another bit off to create a biometric. Right, you see that it's the client themselves decides whether they want to use 2-factor, 3-factor, 4-factor, or whatever. Right, they get the full secret, but then they can divvy it up any way they like. Right, so it's an elegant, simple solution to the problem of multi-factor authentication. From the user's point of view, there's a kind of a paradigm in security where more security means less usability. Right, here we're breaking that. Right? This is actually simpler to use than a username with a big, long, awkward password. From the user's point of view, they simply enter a 4-digit PIN. It's very like the banking experience. Or if you want a biometric only, they simply look at their phone, and that supplies the second factor. Right? So it's the special form of these cryptographic keys that enable us to do this. Right, one last thing you may be concerned about. Some authority, the distributed authority system has given me this key, right? I've put it together. But then the service might decide they don't want to accept me anymore. They want to revoke me, right? They don't want this to work anymore, right? So how can we solve the problem of revocation? Well, this is how we do it, right? We take a slice out of the back. So cucumbers are great because you can carve them up so easily. Right, so I've taken a slice out of the back. Right, this is then the secret that's issued to me. Right, it looks the business from where you're looking at, but actually there's a bit missing. However, I can do the same stuff with it. I can chop a PIN number off the end. I can extract a biometric from it. Right, this missing part is what we call a time permit. Right, and this has the date embedded in it. right? So I, in effect, write the date on the back of that, right? And this has today's date embedded in it. And the server, as parts of its calculation, is going to use today's date, which means that this is not usable without the time permit, right? With the time permit added back in, now I can use it. This time permit by itself is of no use to anyone else. It needs no cryptographic protection. It can be broadcast in the open, right? There's no issues around that. It's no use to anyone except me, because this is unique to my identity, right? So these things just need to be published. So to revoke someone, you simply don't publish it, right? And that chops them off at the knees. This will no longer work because there's a missing part. You issue these daily, every day, or weekly, or monthly, or whatever, however you want your system to work. And the time permit then gets added, the tip gets added back on again, and again you can authenticate, right? So that's our product. We call it MPIN, and it's, we think it's the solution to the username password authentication on the internet, right? It's the simplest, elegant, most natural, multi-factor way of doing authentication with these secrets of this new form that comes out of this pairing-based elliptic curve crypto, which was started basically 10 years ago, the research, but it's kind of mature now. I've been all over the world at conferences presenting papers on it. Lots of colleagues have contributed to it, right? So at this stage, it's a pretty mature technology. Okay, so that's basically our presentation. And MPIN will start, you will start to become aware of it in the very near future.
So thanks a lot, Mike. I think that was actually the first cryptographic talk ever presented using sliced cucumbers. So you all are the first to see such an innovation in cryptographic presentations. As Mike said, MPIN is our strong authentication platform, but the technology behind it and the ability to actually distribute trust across the internet solves a myriad of problems. Incidentally, this is probably not the only way to do this, but it expounds and expands on a philosophical tangent and argument that came up, particularly has been highlighted since we are now in the post-Edward Snowden era, as everybody calls it, about actually who gets to have access to these keys, who is the actual trust authority behind all the encryption and decryption keys that essentially power our lives on the internet. And this is one way of solving that paradigm by splitting and distributing the trust across several different sources, rather than having one monolithic whole or one giant internet service provider that handles them as it currently stands now. So I'm sure you'll be seeing more technologies like this coming out in the near future. Ours is out now and available. So if you're interested, do visit CertiVox.com to find out more about MPIN. And thank you very much for having us.